The millionaire was ready to marry out of duty, until the bride's sister walked in and stole his heart. Hey there, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from before we start, and once the story ends, make sure to give it a score from 0 to 10. Enjoy the ride. Adrian Lockwood stared at the wedding invitation in his hands, knowing it was his own execution notice. The thick, cream-colored paper felt heavier than the quarterly reports that usually crossed his mahogany desk. Embossed gold lettering announced his upcoming marriage to Savannah Wheeler in 2 weeks. 2 weeks until he'd seal a deal that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with keeping his renewable energy empire afloat. He set the invitation down and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse. 36 floors below, the city pulsed with life while he felt increasingly dead inside. At 36, he'd built an empire worth hundreds of millions, yet couldn't buy himself a single moment of genuine happiness. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lockwood, your mother is here." Of course she is. Vivian Lockwood entered his office like she owned it, which, technically, she partially did. Her Chanel suit was impeccable, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her smile as sharp as her business instincts. "Adrian, darling, we need to discuss the final arrangements." "The arrangements are handled, Mother." He didn't turn from the window. "Not the wedding arrangements, the merger arrangements." She moved closer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "The Wheeler textile empire complements our renewable energy portfolio perfectly. Their connections in sustainable fashion will open doors we've been trying to break down for years." Adrian finally faced her. "You mean doors that will make us richer? Don't be naive. Rich is safe. Rich is powerful. Rich is empty." The word escaped before he could stop it. Vivian's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Empty? Adrian, you're about to marry one of the most beautiful, successful women in New Jersey. Savannah has millions of followers, brand deals worth more than most people's yearly salaries, and comes from a family that's been building wealth for generations. She also hasn't looked up from her phone long enough to have a real conversation with me in 6 months. Marriage isn't about conversation, Adrian, it's about compatibility. Shared goals, mutual benefit." He wanted to laugh, but the sound would have been too bitter. "When did you become so cynical?" "The day your father died and left me to run this company with a 22-year-old son who thought love conquered all." Her voice softened slightly. "I learned that love is a luxury we can't afford. Security is what matters. Legacy is what matters." Adrian picked up a framed photo from his desk. His father at a construction site, hard hat askew, grinning at the camera. Thomas Lockwood had built their first wind farm with his own hands, and a dream of clean energy for everyone. He'd died of a heart attack at 52, working 18-hour days to turn that dream into reality. "Dad loved what he did," Adrian said quietly. "Your father loved an idea. I love results." Vivian moved to the door, then paused. "The rehearsal dinner is Friday. The Wheeler family is flying in from all over, including Savannah's sister, Julia, Janet, something with a J. Juliet. You know her name?" "Savannah mentioned her once. She's a teacher in Portland. Apparently she's different." Vivian's expression sharpened. "Different how?" "Quiet. Doesn't do social media. Keeps to herself." "Well, she'll need to learn to fit in. She's about to be family." Vivian smoothed her skirt. "I trust you'll make sure the rehearsal goes smoothly. We can't afford any complications." After she left, Adrian returned to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of the Oregon coast, a place he'd visited once for a renewable energy conference and never forgotten. Wide beaches, towering trees, and a silence that actually felt peaceful instead of suffocating. He wondered if Juliet Wheeler loved those Oregon sunsets, if she'd ever stood on a beach and felt small in the best possible way, if she'd ever looked at a man and seen something more than a business opportunity. His phone buzzed. A text from Savannah. "Babe? Can't wait for you to see my rehearsal dress. It's going to be perfect for the live stream. Wheeler Lockwood wedding." Adrian stared at the message with its carefully curated emoji and hashtag and felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart. That had been locked away for years. Something deeper. Something that whispered he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He typed back, looking forward to it. The lie came so easily now. Tomorrow he'd drive to New Jersey for the final preparations. He'd smile for the cameras, shake hands with business associates, and pretend he was happy. He'd meet Juliet Wheeler, the quiet sister who apparently didn't fit into their golden world. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a dangerous thought took root. What if different was exactly what he needed? Juliet Wheeler pressed her forehead against the airplane window, watching Portland disappear beneath the clouds like a dream she wasn't ready to wake up from. The flight attendant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Newark. Please return your seats to the upright position." "I'd rather return to my apartment," Juliet thought, gripping the worn paperback copy of Jane Eyre in her lap. She'd read it 17 times, but Charlotte Bronte's words still offered more comfort than the idea of facing her family after 3 years of self-imposed exile. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Darling, the driver will be waiting with a sign. Don't forget to smile for the photographers at the hotel. Savannah's wedding is front-page news." Juliet's stomach clenched. Photographers. Of course there would be photographers. Savannah couldn't breathe without documenting it for her 4.2 million followers. She typed back, "I'll try to remember how to smile." The response came immediately. "Juliet Marie Wheeler, this is your sister's wedding. The biggest day of her life. Please try to be positive." "What about the biggest day of my life?" Juliet wondered. "Would anyone notice if I had one?" The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and Juliet's anxiety spiked. She'd been managing her panic attacks better lately. Deep breathing, grounding exercises, the techniques Dr. Morrison had taught her. But returning to New Jersey felt like willingly walking back into a cage she'd spent years escaping. Newark Airport was a maze of noise and movement that made her head spin. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and searched for the driver her mother had mentioned. Her simple black dress and flat shoes felt painfully plain, compared to the designer outfits and clicking heels around her. "Miss Wheeler?" She turned to find a uniformed driver holding a sign with her name. Behind him stood a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a camera-ready smile. "Juliet, oh my God, you look—" Savannah paused, her Instagram-trained eyes scanning her sister's appearance. "Different. More understated?" "Hello, Savannah." Juliet accepted the brief hug, inhaling her sister's expensive perfume. "You look beautiful as always." "Thank you. I'm literally glowing, aren't I? It's the new skincare routine I'm partnering with. I'll tag you in my stories tonight." Savannah linked arms with her sister, leading her toward the exit. "Come on, we have so much to catch up on. And I'm dying for you to meet Adrian." The drive to the Wheeler family estate in Princeton took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of Savannah's nonstop chatter about wedding details, brand partnerships, and the absolutely insane number of RSVPs they'd received. "The venue is going to be perfect. Mom hired the same planner who did the Vanderbilt wedding last year. And the flowers. Oh my God, Juliet, you should see the flowers. White roses, peonies, and baby's breath. Very classic, very elegant, very, timeless for the photos." Juliet watched familiar landscapes blur past the window. The same tree-lined streets she'd walked as a child. The same perfectly manicured lawns that had always felt more like stage sets than real places where real families lived. "How's teaching?" Savannah asked, finally taking a breath. "It's good. I love my students. We're reading The Great Gatsby right now." "Oh, that's nice. Very educational." Savannah's tone suggested she found education quaint but ultimately irrelevant. You could totally start a book talk account. Teacher content is huge right now. I could introduce you to some brands that would love to partner with an authentic educator. I don't really do social media, but you could. That's what I'm saying. You have this whole mysterious intellectual vibe that would be so refreshing. Savannah Wheeler's bookworm sister or something like that. Juliet felt her chest tighten. Even her career, her passion, her small corner of purpose in the world could be reduced to content for her sister's brand. "I prefer teaching to performing," she said quietly. "But teaching is performing, isn't it? You're in front of people every day making learning entertaining." Savannah scrolled through her phone, already distracted. "Oh, Adrian just texted. He's at the house already. You're going to love him, Juliet. He's so sophisticated, so successful, and he's actually really smart. Like, business smart. You two will probably have lots to talk about." The Wheeler estate came into view and Juliet's anxiety spiked again. The sprawling colonial mansion looked exactly the same. Imposing, perfect, and utterly unwelcoming. Cars filled the circular driveway, and she could see people moving around inside the house through the tall windows. "Deep breath," she whispered to herself, using Dr. Morrison's technique. "You can do this. It's just one weekend." As they walked toward the front door, Savannah suddenly stopped. "Oh, I almost forgot. Mom wanted me to mention, try to mingle tonight, okay? Don't do that thing where you disappear into a corner with a book. This is important for all of us. What thing? You know, the hermit thing. The antisocial thing. I mean, I get it, you're shy, but Adrian's family is here and his business partners, and there are going to be some really important people. Savannah's voice trailed off as she seemed to realize how she sounded. I'll try to be less myself, Juliet said, surprised by the edge in her own voice. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. The front door opened before they could continue the conversation. Their mother, Diane Wheeler, appeared in a cloud of expensive perfume and disapproval. Juliet, darling, there you are. We need to get you ready for cocktails. The Lockwoods are already here, and first impressions are everything. As she was swept into the familiar chaos of her family's expectations, Juliet caught a glimpse of herself in the hall mirror. She looked small, overwhelmed, and completely out of place. Maybe I should have stayed in Portland, she thought. But then she heard a voice from the living room, deep, warm, and somehow different from the polished chatter filling the house. A voice that made her pause and listen, even though she couldn't make out the words. Something about that voice made her think that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who felt like an outsider in this perfectly orchestrated world. 20 minutes later, Juliet found herself standing at the top of the curved staircase, wearing a borrowed dress that belonged to her sister and feeling like an imposter in her own family's house. The navy blue cocktail dress was beautiful and completely wrong for her. It hugged curves she preferred to hide and sparkled with sequins that caught the light every time she moved. Her mother had insisted, of course. You can't wear that plain black thing to meet the Lockwoods, darling. What would they think? They'd think I'm comfortable in my own skin, Juliet had wanted to say. Instead, she'd let herself be dressed up like a doll. The sounds of the cocktail party drifted up from the living room below. Crystal glasses clinking, polished laughter, and the kind of conversation that never said anything real. She gripped the mahogany banister, using another one of Dr. Morrison's techniques. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. You look like you're about to face a firing squad. Juliet spun around to find a man leaning against the wall at the end of the hallway. Tall, dark-haired, with the kind of easy confidence that usually made her want to disappear. But his eyes held something unexpected, a tiredness that matched her own. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. She tugged at the dress, wishing she could vanish into the wallpaper. Adrian Lockwood. He pushed off the wall and extended his hand. And you must be the mysterious sister. This is Adrian. Juliet had expected someone flashier, more obviously wealthy. Instead, he wore a simple gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but he wore it like he'd forgotten he had it on. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive, and he didn't hold her hand a second longer than necessary. Juliet Wheeler. And I'm not mysterious, I'm just... She searched for the right word. Elsewhere. Elsewhere. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's honest. Most people would say they're excited to be here or looking forward to the celebration. Are you excited to be here? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Her cheeks burned. I'm sorry, that was honest, he finished. And no, I'm not excited. I'm hiding in a hallway, trying to work up the courage to go back downstairs and pretend I enjoy talking about quarterly profits at my own engagement party. There was something in his voice, a rawness that made her look at him more closely. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, and they held the same trapped feeling she recognized in herself. Why are you hiding? She asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that's too personal. I don't know you. Because your mother is trying to introduce me to someone called Big Jim, who apparently owns half the golf courses in New Jersey, and I'd rather discuss literature with a complete stranger in a hallway. I teach literature. Of course you do. His smile became genuine. What's your favorite book? Right now? Jane Eyre. The governess who refuses to be anyone's mistress or possession. He leaned against the banister. I can see why you'd relate to her. Juliet blinked. Most people, if they knew the book at all, focused on the romance or the gothic elements. But Adrian had gone straight to the heart of Jane's character, her fierce independence, her refusal to compromise her integrity for comfort. You've read it? Business school required more literature than you'd think. Plus, my father used to say that understanding stories helped him understand people. Adrian's expression softened. He was right, usually. Used to say. He died when I was 22. Heart attack. Left me a company and a mother who thinks emotions are bad for business. The words hung between them, more intimate than anything she'd expected from this perfectly polished man. Juliet found herself stepping closer, drawn by the sadness in his voice. I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying. Yeah, He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfectly styled waves. Some days I still feel like I'm pretending to be someone who knows what he's doing. You seem to be doing fine from where I'm standing. Appearances can be deceiving. He gestured toward the sounds of the party below. Case in point, they stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who'd found an unexpected refuge in each other's honesty. Then Savannah's voice drifted up from the bottom of the stairs. "Adrian, are you up there? People are asking for you." Adrian's expression shifted, the openness sliding away like a mask being replaced. "Duty calls." "Adrian, wait." The words escaped before Juliet could think. "What you said about pretending, we're all pretending something. What are you pretending? That I want to be here, that I fit in, that I'm happy for my sister." She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "That I don't wish I was back in Portland, grading papers and drinking tea alone. Alone doesn't sound so bad right now. Alone is safe. Safe is overrated." He started toward the stairs, then looked back. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're pretending very well." "What do you mean? You're the only person in this house who seems real." And then he was gone, leaving Juliet alone in the hallway with her heart beating faster than it should, and the dangerous realization that Adrian Lockwood was nothing like she'd expected. Real, she thought, touching the sequined dress that felt like a costume. When was the last time anyone called me real? From downstairs she could hear her sister's bright laughter and Adrian's deeper voice joining the conversation. The sounds of a perfect couple at their perfect party, preparing for their perfect wedding. But something in that 5-minute conversation had felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years, and that terrified her more than any social anxiety ever could. The Oak Room at Princeton Country Club glittered with enough crystal and gold to fund a small school district, but Juliet couldn't stop staring at the empty chair beside Adrian. She'd watched him navigate the rehearsal dinner for 2 hours now, and he'd mastered the art of being present without actually being there. He smiled at the right moments, laughed at the appropriate jokes, and gave a toast that sounded heartfelt but felt hollow. Only Juliet seemed to notice the way his fingers drummed against his thigh when he thought no one was looking, or how his eyes kept drifting toward the exit. Savannah, meanwhile, was in her element. She'd changed outfits 3 times for different content moments, documented every course for her Instagram stories, and posed for what felt like hundreds of photos with guests who seemed more interested in being seen with her than actually celebrating her happiness. "More champagne, miss?" A server appeared at Juliet's elbow. "Please." She needed something to do with her hands besides twist her napkin into knots. "You're not eating." Juliet looked up to find Adrian standing beside her chair. The other guests were mingling now, the formal dinner portion over but the evening far from finished. "I'm not really hungry." She gestured at the elaborate 7-course meal that had been more performance than sustenance. "It's beautiful, but you'd rather have a sandwich and be left alone?" "A grilled cheese and tomato soup, actually, with a good book and nobody asking me to smile for pictures." Adrian pulled out the empty chair beside her. "Mind if I join you? I've reached my limit of conversations about the stock market." "Shouldn't you be mingling with your future in-laws?" "Probably." He sat anyway, loosening his tie slightly. "But I'd rather talk to someone who reads Jane Eyre." Across the room, Savannah was posing with her bridesmaids, directing them like a photographer. "Move a little to the left, Brittany. Tilt your chin up, Madison. Perfect. This is going to get so many likes." "Does she always—" Juliet gestured vaguely at her sister's performance. "Document everything?" "Yeah. I don't think she's experienced a moment in the last 6 months that wasn't immediately shared with her followers." Adrian's voice held no judgment, just exhaustion. "I've learned not to say anything interesting during dinner because it might end up as content. That must feel lonely." The word came out more raw than he probably intended. "Sorry, I shouldn't complain. Your sister is lovely, she's successful, she's perfect on paper." Adrian looked at her sharply. "That's not what I was going to say, but it's what you were thinking." Juliet took a sip of champagne, surprised by her own boldness. "I grew up with her, remember? I know what it's like to live in the shadow of someone who never has a bad angle or an awkward moment." "You don't seem awkward." "I'm having an anxiety attack right now, actually. I'm just really good at hiding it." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. Adrian's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Do you need to step outside? Get some air? I need to go home to Portland and pretend this weekend never happened." She set down her glass with a shaky hand. "But since that's not an option, I'm using breathing techniques and trying not to think about how many people are looking at us right now." Adrian glanced around the room. Several guests were indeed watching them, some with curiosity, others with barely disguised judgment. Diane Wheeler was making her way toward them with the determined stride of a woman on a mission. "Dance with me," Adrian said suddenly. "What? If we're dancing, they'll think it's normal conversation. Your mother will stop looking like she wants to separate us, and you'll have something to focus on besides the anxiety." "I don't really dance." "Neither do I, usually, but I think we can manage to sway without falling down." The band was playing something slow and safe, the kind of music designed not to offend anyone or make anyone feel anything too deeply. Adrian stood and offered his hand. "Trust me?" Against every instinct that told her to flee, Juliet took his hand. On the dance floor, surrounded by other couples going through the motions of romance, they found an unexpected pocket of peace. Adrian was right. They weren't really dancing, just swaying gently while having the most honest conversation of the entire weekend. "Why are you marrying her?" Juliet asked quietly. "Because it makes sense. Our families have been friends for years. Our companies complement each other, and she's everything a man in my position should want." "That's not an answer." "Because I stopped believing in fairy tales when my father died." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Love is a luxury I can't afford. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." "Is it? Or is it practical? Look around, Juliet. How many of these marriages do you think are based on grand passion versus mutual benefit?" She did look around, at couples dancing without really seeing each other, at conversations that never went below the surface, at a room full of people who seemed to be performing happiness rather than feeling it. "Maybe that's why I stayed in Portland," she said. "I'd rather be alone than be lonely in a room full of people." "Are you lonely now?" The question caught her off guard. She was standing in her least favorite place in the world, wearing a dress that wasn't hers, surrounded by people who made her feel invisible. But Adrian's gray eyes were focused entirely on her, like she was the only person in the room who mattered. "No," she whispered. "I'm not. Neither am I." The song ended, but neither of them moved. Around them the party continued, laughter and chatter and the clink of glasses, but they remained in their small bubble of unexpected understanding. "Juliet," Savannah's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "There you are. I need you in a sister photo for my story." The spell broke. Adrian stepped back, the careful distance returning to his expression, but his eyes lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally. "Thank you for the rescue." As she walked toward her sister's beckoning camera, Juliet realized something that terrified her. For the first time in her adult life, she'd felt like she belonged somewhere, and that somewhere was in the arms of her sister's fiancé. Juliet couldn't sleep, so she found herself in her mother's garden at midnight, sitting on the stone bench where she used to hide as a child, whenever the house became too suffocating. The wedding was tomorrow, in less than 12 hours actually, and she should have been exhausted. Instead, her mind raced with thoughts she had no right thinking, and feelings she had no right feeling. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face during their dance, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and rare. "Stop it," she told herself. "He's marrying your sister in the morning." The garden was peaceful in the moonlight. Her mother's prized roses climbed the white trellises, and the fountain bubbled softly in the center. This had always been Juliet's sanctuary, the one place in the Wheeler estate where she could be herself without judgment. Couldn't sleep either? Juliet nearly jumped out of her skin. Adrian emerged from the shadow of the oak tree, still wearing his dress shirt from dinner, but with the sleeves rolled up and the top buttons undone. He looked younger somehow, less controlled. "I thought you'd gone back to your hotel." "I should have." He sat on the other end of the bench, careful to maintain distance between them. "But I kept thinking about what you said, about being lonely in a room full of people. You should be getting rest. Tomorrow's a big day. The biggest." His voice was flat. "The day I sign my life away to someone who thinks I'm a good business decision." "Adrian, do you know what Savannah said to me tonight? After the dinner when we were saying goodnight?" He stared at the fountain. "She said she was excited about the honeymoon photos." "Not the honeymoon, the photos. She's already planned which beaches will photograph best for her Instagram." Juliet's heart ached for him. Maybe she's just nervous. People handle stress differently. "You're defending her. She's my sister, and I'm supposed to be her fiancé." He turned to look at her. "But I spent the entire evening wishing I was talking to you instead." The words hung between them like a confession neither of them was ready for. Juliet felt her pulse quicken, that familiar flutter of panic mixed with something else entirely, something warm and dangerous. You can't say things like that. Why not? Because it's inappropriate? Because it's inconvenient? Because it ruins the perfect wedding that everyone's been planning around us? Adrian's voice grew stronger. I'm tired of saying the right things, Juliet. I'm tired of pretending. Then why are you going through with it? Because I don't know how to stop. He ran his hands through his hair. Because my mother has already transferred the merger documents. Because 500 people are coming tomorrow and backing out now would destroy both our families' reputations. Because I've been raised to honor my commitments even when they're killing me. And because you don't believe in love anyway. I didn't. Until this weekend. He looked at her with such intensity that she had to look away. Until I met someone who makes me think maybe there's something worth believing in after all. Don't. The word came out sharper than she intended. Please don't. Don't what? Don't tell you that you're the first person who's made me laugh genuinely in months. Don't tell you that I've never felt more myself than I have in the 3 conversations we've shared. Don't tell you that I keep looking for you in every room I enter. Juliet stood abruptly, pacing to the fountain. The cool mist kissed her face, but it did nothing to calm the storm building inside her chest. You're getting married tomorrow. To my sister, who loves you. Does she? Or does she love the idea of me? The status, the wealth, the perfect Instagram husband who'll give her beautiful children and never interfere with her brand. That's not fair, isn't it? Adrian stood too, moving closer but not touching. When's the last time she asked me about my dreams? My fears? Hell, when's the last time she asked me anything that wasn't related to wedding planning or photo opportunities? Maybe you haven't given her the chance. Maybe you've been as closed off with her as you think she's been with you. You're right. His admission surprised her. I have been closed off, because I learned early that vulnerability gets you hurt, and I couldn't afford to be hurt. But you, he stepped closer. You make me want to take that risk. I'm nobody, Adrian. I'm a schoolteacher from Portland who can barely handle family dinners without having panic attacks. I'm not sophisticated or beautiful or Instagram-worthy. I'm real, he interrupted. You're real in a world full of performances. You're kind without an agenda. You're smart without being pretentious. You see people, really see them instead of just seeing what they can do for you. Tears stung her eyes. Stop. You asked me why I'm marrying her and I told you it made sense. But nothing about how I feel when I'm with you makes sense. And somehow that feels more right than anything else in my life. She's my sister, Juliet whispered. I know. I can't do this to her. I know that too. They stood facing each other in the moonlight, 2 people caught between desire and duty, between what they wanted and what was right. The fountain continued its gentle babbling, oblivious to the human drama playing out beside it. What are we going to do? Juliet asked. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation. We're going to go to bed. Tomorrow I'll marry your sister and you'll smile for the cameras. We'll pretend this conversation never happened, and you'll go back to Portland, and I'll learn to live with the choice I've made. And that's it? That has to be it. But neither of them moved. Neither of them walked away. They stood in the garden, memorizing each other's faces, knowing that tomorrow everything would change and this moment, this perfect, impossible moment, would be all they'd ever have. I should go, Juliet finally said. You should. Good night, Adrian. Good night, Juliet. She made it halfway to the house before she heard him whisper, I wish I'd met you first. The words followed her all the way to her room, where she finally cried, for him, for herself, and for the cruel timing that had brought them together one day too late. The sound of Savannah's voice pierced through the bridal suite like champagne bubbles bursting, bright, effervescent, and somehow hollow. This is literally the most perfect day of my entire life, she declared to her phone camera, spinning in her Vera Wang gown. My followers have been asking for a behind-the-scenes look at my wedding morning, so here we are. Juliet sat in the corner, mechanically curling ribbon for the bouquet stems while watching her sister perform happiness for 30,000 viewers who were more invested in her love story than she seemed to be herself. She'd barely slept after the garden conversation with Adrian. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice. I wish I'd met you first. The words had carved themselves into her heart, beautiful and devastating in equal measure. Juliet, come say hi to everyone. Savannah waved her over, but Juliet shook her head. I'm not really good on camera. She's so shy, Savannah explained to her phone. But she looks gorgeous today, doesn't she? She turned the camera toward Juliet, who immediately looked down at her hands. Anyway, let me show you guys the shoes. Diane Wheeler bustled into the room carrying a steaming cup of coffee and radiating the controlled energy of a military general. Girls, the photographer wants to start in 20 minutes. Savannah, your makeup artist needs to touch up your lipstick. Juliet, for heaven's sake, try to look happy. You're in every family photo. I'm happy, Mom. You look like you're attending a funeral. Maybe I am, Juliet thought. Maybe we all are. Through the window, she could see guests arriving at the garden ceremony site. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arch covered in white roses, and baby's breath, a string quartet playing softly. Everything looked like a fairy tale, which made the hollow feeling in her chest even worse. Has anyone seen the groom this morning? Asked Brittany, one of the bridesmaids, as she adjusted her pink dress. He texted that he was getting ready at the hotel, Savannah said, not looking up from her phone. He's probably nervous. Men always get weird on wedding days. Weird seemed like an understatement for what Adrian was probably feeling. Juliet wondered if he'd slept at all, or if he'd spent the night staring at the ceiling thinking about duty and desire, and all the ways a person could trap themselves in a life they never really wanted. Juliet, you're dropping rose petals everywhere, her mother snapped. She looked down to find that she'd been systematically destroying the flowers she was supposed to be arranging, her nervous fingers plucking petals without her realizing it. Sorry, I'll clean it up. As she knelt to gather the scattered petals, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Are you okay? Her heart stopped. How had Adrian gotten her number? And why was he texting her on his wedding day? She glanced around the room. Everyone was busy with last-minute preparations, her mother directing the photographer like a Hollywood producer. Quickly, she typed back, I'm fine. Today is about Savannah. The response came immediately. I can't stop thinking about last night. Juliet's hands trembled as she stared at the words. She should delete the message. She should block his number. She should focus on being a good sister and forget that her heart was breaking. Instead, she found herself typing, You have to. In 2 hours, you'll be married. I know. That's what terrifies me. Juliet, what are you doing down there? Savannah's voice cut through her thoughts. We need to take sister photos before my hair gets messed up. Juliet quickly deleted the message thread and slipped her phone back into her clutch. Coming. For the next hour, she smiled on command, posed when directed, and watched her sister transform the most important day of her life into content for strangers on the internet. Part of her wanted to shake Savannah and ask if she actually loved Adrian, or if she just loved the idea of being a bride, of having the perfect wedding that would trend on social media. But another part of her, the part that felt guilty for even having feelings for her sister's fiancé, stayed silent. Time to go, ladies. The wedding coordinator appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand and the frazzled energy of someone managing a million details. The groom and groomsmen are in position. Guests are seated. It's showtime. As they filed out of the bridal suite, Juliet caught a glimpse of herself in the full-length mirror. The pale pink bridesmaid dress was beautiful, perfectly tailored, and made her look like someone she didn't recognize. Someone who belonged in this world of perfect weddings and strategic marriages. The problem was, she didn't want to belong here. She wanted to be back in Portland in her tiny apartment with her stack of ungraded papers and her window that looked out onto a tree instead of a perfectly manicured lawn. She wanted to be anywhere but walking toward a ceremony where she'd have to watch the man she was falling in love with marry someone else. Nervous? Asked Madison, another bridesmaid, as they lined up in the hallway. Terrified, Juliet admitted. Oh, it'll be fine. Weddings always make people emotional. Emotional was another understatement. Juliet felt like she was drowning, like every step toward the garden was taking her deeper underwater. Her breathing techniques weren't working. Her grounding exercises felt useless. All she could think about was Adrian's face in the moonlight, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and impossible. Places, everyone. The coordinator clapped her hands. Juliet, you're first down the aisle, then Madison, then Brittany. Remember to walk slowly and smile. The photographer needs time for shots. As the first notes of the processional music began, Juliet took a deep breath and stepped toward the garden. Through the archway, she could see the guests, the flowers, the perfect setting for a perfect wedding. And at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo and completely miserable, stood Adrian. Their eyes met across the garden, and for a moment the rest of the world disappeared. No guests, no cameras, no expectations, just two people who'd found each other at exactly the wrong time. Juliet forced herself to look away and began the longest walk of her life, knowing that each step was taking her toward a moment that would change everything and destroy the fragile hope she'd been carrying in her heart. Adrian had never felt more like a fraud than he did standing at the altar, watching Juliet walk toward him in a dress the color of sunset. She moved with the careful precision of someone trying not to shatter, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. When their eyes met, he saw his own desperation reflected back at him, the look of two people drowning in circumstances beyond their control. The guests rustled behind him, 500 people who'd come to witness what they believed was a love story. His mother sat in the front row, her satisfied smile suggesting she thought she'd successfully orchestrated his future. The cameras clicked constantly, documenting every moment for posterity and Savannah's social media empire. This is wrong, he thought as Juliet took her place at the altar. Everything about this is wrong. The string quartet shifted into the bridal march, and every head turned toward the garden entrance. Savannah appeared, radiant in white silk and confidence, her arm linked through her father's. She looked like every bride was supposed to look, glowing, perfect, ready for her fairy tale moment. But Adrian couldn't take his eyes off Juliet. She stood among the other bridesmaids, her face carefully composed, but he could see the pain she was trying to hide. The way her knuckles were white from gripping her bouquet, the rapid rise and fall of her chest as she struggled to control her breathing. The single tear she quickly wiped away when she thought no one was looking. He was looking. He couldn't stop looking. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying across the garden. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Adrian Thomas Lockwood and Savannah Grace Wheeler." The words washed over Adrian like white noise. He went through the motions, standing when prompted, responding when required, but his mind was elsewhere. In a garden at midnight, in a hallway where someone had called him real, in a world where timing wasn't everything, and love was more than a luxury he couldn't afford. "Adrian, do you take Savannah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The question hit him like a physical blow. This was it, the moment where he sealed his fate and buried whatever impossible future he'd imagined with Juliet. He opened his mouth to say, "I do," the two words that would end everything before it could begin, but nothing came out. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the fountain's gentle bubbling and the distant sound of traffic on Nassau Street. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Cameras continued clicking. Pastor Williams cleared his throat gently. "Adrian," Savannah whispered, her perfect smile faltering slightly. "Babe?" He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in months, she was beautiful, successful, everything his mother had said she should want. But standing there in her designer gown, surrounded by all the trappings of the perfect wedding, she felt like a stranger. Then he looked at Juliet and saw his whole life in her frightened, hopeful eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "What?" Savannah's voice was sharp with confusion. "I'm sorry," he repeated louder this time. "I can't do this." The garden erupted, gasps from the guests, the rapid-fire clicking of cameras, his mother's sharp intake of breath. But Adrian only heard the sound of his own heartbeat as he stepped back from the altar. "Adrian, what are you doing?" Savannah's voice rose to near hysteria. "This is our wedding. Everyone's watching. The live stream." "I know, and I'm sorry, but I can't marry you when I'm in love with someone else." The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Savannah's face went white, then red, then white again. Diane Wheeler looked like she might faint. Vivian Lockwood's expression promised that this conversation was far from over. "Who?" Savannah demanded. "Who are you in love with?" Adrian's eyes found Juliet's across the garden. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, silently begging him not to destroy her life along with his own. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "What matters is that it wouldn't be fair to you. You deserve someone who loves you completely, not someone who's pretending because it makes sense on paper." "You bastard!" Savannah's voice was ice cold. "You absolute bastard. Do you know what you've just done? The humiliation, the money, the contracts? I know. And I'll make it right financially. I'll cover everything. But I won't trap us both in a marriage that's built on convenience instead of love." He began pulling off his boutonniere, his hands surprisingly steady now that the decision was made. Around them, the garden buzzed with shocked whispers and the sound of guests reaching for their phones to capture the scandal. "Adrian Thomas Lockwood," his mother's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You will stop this nonsense immediately." "No, Mother, I won't." He looked at her directly. "Dad married you because he loved you. He chose love over convenience, passion over profit. I'm finally doing the same. Your father was a fool who died young and broke. My father was happy, and he taught me that some things matter more than money. Adrian's voice grew stronger. I'd rather be broke and honest than rich and empty. Savannah was crying now, her perfect makeup running in black streams down her cheeks. How could you do this to me? In front of everyone? On our wedding day? Because doing it in private would have been kinder to you, but crueler to both of us in the long run. He reached for her hand, but she jerked away. You'll hate me now, but someday you'll thank me. You deserve someone who sees you as more than a good business decision. Get away from me, she whispered. Just get away from me. Adrian nodded and began walking down the aisle, past 500 shocked faces and countless camera phones. At the back of the garden, he turned for one last look. Juliet was gone. Her pink dress was nowhere to be seen among the chaos of guests and wedding party members trying to process what had just happened. She'd disappeared, probably the moment he'd mentioned being in love with someone else. Smart girl, he thought. Get as far away from this disaster as possible. As he reached his car, Adrian pulled out his phone and typed a single message. I'm sorry. For everything. You were right. We should have pretended this never happened. I hope someday you can forgive me for being selfish enough to choose truth over keeping your secret. He hit send, then drove away from the wreckage of his perfectly planned life, not knowing if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life or finally done something brave. Behind him, the garden filled with the sound of Savannah's sobs and the excited chatter of guests who'd just witnessed the social event of the season, for all the wrong reasons. Juliet's hands shook as she threw clothes into her suitcase, not caring what she grabbed or how it folded. She had to get out, now, before anyone came looking for her, before the reporters figured out who Adrian meant when he said he was in love with someone else, before her family's rage found its target. The house was in chaos below. She could hear Savannah's wailing, her mother's sharp voice directing damage control, car doors slamming as guests fled the scene. But up in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded posters and books she'd read 100 times, Juliet felt like she was suffocating. Her phone buzzed constantly. Text after text, notification after notification. She didn't read them, couldn't read them. Every sound made her feel more trapped, more desperate to disappear. A knock at her door made her freeze. Juliet? Her father's voice gentle and tired. Can we talk? I'm packing, Dad. Your flight isn't until tomorrow night. The door creaked open, and Robert Wheeler stepped inside, still wearing his tuxedo but with his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by years of managing the women in his family. I changed it. I'm leaving tonight. He sat on her bed, careful not to disturb the clothes she was frantically stuffing into her bag. Want to tell me what happened out there? You saw what happened. Adrian lost his mind and called off the wedding. That's what happened to Adrian. I'm asking what happened to you. Juliet's hand stilled on a sweater she didn't remember packing. Her father had always been the quiet one, the observer, the parent who noticed things others missed. Nothing happened to me. I'm just the sister who wants to go home. You disappeared the second he mentioned being in love with someone else. That's not nothing. The gentleness in his voice broke something inside her. She sank onto the window seat where she used to read on rainy afternoons and finally looked at him. It's not what you think. What do I think? That I'm some homewrecker who stole my sister's fiancé. That I planned this. Her voice cracked. That I meant for any of this to happen. Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the same careful attention he'd given her scraped knees and broken hearts when she was little. You know what I think? I think you're a good person who got caught in an impossible situation. And I think Adrian Lockwood is probably the first man who ever really saw you. The accuracy of his words hit her like a physical blow. Tears she'd been holding back since the garden finally spilled over. I didn't mean for it to happen, Dad. I tried to stay away from him. I tried to be a good sister, but he was so... She searched for the right word. Lost, and lonely, and real, in a way that no one else in this family is. Including Savannah? Especially Savannah. The admission felt like betrayal, but it was true. She doesn't love him. She loves the idea of him. The status, the wedding, the Instagram content. She's been planning their life together like it's a brand collaboration. And you think you love him? I know I do, which makes me the worst sister in the world. Robert moved to sit beside her on the window seat, the same way he had when she was 8, and crying, because Savannah had borrowed her favorite book and returned it with water damage. You're not the worst anything, sweetheart. You're human, and sometimes humans fall in love with people they can't have. But he's Savannah's. He's not Savannah's anything anymore. He made that pretty clear in front of 500 people. But the family, the business, the We'll survive. Money always finds a way to flow around obstacles. But hearts? He touched her face gently. Hearts are more fragile and more precious. From downstairs came the sound of breaking glass, followed by Savannah's voice. Where is she? Where is my backstabbing sister? Juliet's eyes widened. She knows. Probably not for certain, but Savannah's not stupid, and she's hurt and humiliated. She's looking for someone to blame besides Adrian. More footsteps on the stairs accompanied by their mother's voice. Savannah, calm down. We need to think strategically about how to handle this. I don't want to handle it strategically. I want to know if my own sister betrayed me. Robert stood quickly. You need to go. Now. Dad, I'll handle them. I'll tell them you left for the airport already. He grabbed her suitcase and moved to the window. The oak tree. Like when you were 16 and sneaking out to avoid social events. I can't ask you to lie for me. You're not asking. I'm offering. He kissed her forehead. Go to Portland. Let this settle. Maybe someday when emotions aren't so raw, you can all talk like adults. What if they never forgive me? Then they're fools who don't deserve you. The voices in the hallway were getting closer. Juliet grabbed her purse and the last few things she couldn't leave behind. Her copy of Jane Eyre, a photo of her and her father from her college graduation. The necklace her grandmother had left her. Dad, thank you. For understanding. For not hating me. I could never hate you, sweetheart. You're the most honest person in this family, and that's not always easy to be. She was halfway out the window when her phone buzzed one more time. Against her better judgment, she looked. Adrian's message was still there, unread. Below it, 17 missed calls from unknown numbers and one text that made her blood run cold. This isn't over. We need to talk. S. Juliet deleted everything without reading the rest, turned off her phone and climbed down the oak tree she'd used for teenage escapes, feeling like she was 17 again and running from a life that didn't fit. Her Uber driver didn't ask why she was crying, or why she kept looking over her shoulder during the drive to Newark Airport. He just played soft music and handed her tissues. And somehow that small kindness from a stranger made her cry harder. As the plane lifted off, carrying her back to her quiet life in Portland, Juliet pressed her face to the window and watched New Jersey disappear below. She was going home to her tiny apartment, her students, her books, and her peaceful existence where no one expected her to be anything other than herself. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure that peaceful anonymity would be enough. Because somewhere behind her, in the wreckage of a wedding that was supposed to be perfect, a man had chosen truth over convenience. And he'd chosen it for her. Juliet's apartment had never felt smaller than it did on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after the wedding that never was. She sat at her kitchen table, grading essays about The Great Gatsby, while rain drummed against her single window. Her students had written about the green light, that symbol of unreachable dreams, and she found herself making notes in red ink while thinking about gray eyes and midnight gardens. Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us, she read in Tommy Morrison's paper. But sometimes I think the real tragedy isn't that he couldn't have Daisy, but that he never learned to want something real instead of something perfect. She paused, pen hovering over the page. 17-year-old Tommy had accidentally written the most insightful analysis she'd read all semester, and somehow it felt like he was talking directly to her situation. Her phone had been silent for 3 weeks. No calls from family, no texts from her mother about damage control or family reputation, no messages from Savannah, which was somehow worse than the threatening text she'd sent that first night. Even her father hadn't called, though she suspected that was by design rather than abandonment. The silence was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Peace, anonymity, a return to her quiet life where her biggest drama was whether to assign Hamlet or Macbeth for the spring semester. But the silence felt hollow now, like the space where something important used to be. The doorbell rang, startling her out of her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. She never was. Her grocery delivery wasn't until Thursday, and Mrs. Chen from upstairs only visited when her Wi-Fi was down. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of flowers. Juliet Wheeler? He asked when she opened the door. That's me. These are for you. Sign here, please. The bouquet was stunning. White roses, baby's breath, and eucalyptus arranged in a simple glass vase. Nothing like the elaborate arrangements from her mother's garden or Savannah's wedding decor. These felt honest somehow, real. The card was cream-colored, expensive paper with a single line written in handwriting she recognized. Thank you for showing me the difference between perfect and real. A. Juliet sank onto her couch, still holding the card. Adrian had found her address somehow, probably not difficult for a man with his resources, and sent flowers like an apology and a goodbye wrapped in baby's breath. She should throw them away, should pretend she never received them, should continue the radio silence that was protecting both of them from more complications. Instead, she found herself arranging them on her kitchen table, where they immediately transformed her tiny space into something warmer, something that felt less like hiding and more like living. Her laptop chimed with an email, another message she should probably ignore, like the 17 voicemails from reporters and the 43 friend requests from strangers who'd somehow connected her to the wedding scandal of the century. But this email wasn't from a reporter or a social media stalker. It was from the principal of Roosevelt High School where she taught. "Juliet, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out because we've had some inquiries from media outlets asking about you and your employment here. Don't worry, we haven't given out any information and we won't. Your privacy is important to us. However, I thought you should know that there's been some attention. Nothing threatening, just photographers outside the school a few times and some phone calls. It might be good for you to take a few personal days until this blows over. Also, and I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I wanted you to know that whatever happened in New Jersey, it doesn't change our opinion of you. You're one of our best teachers and we're lucky to have you. Take care of yourself. Principal Rodriguez." Juliet stared at the screen, feeling the walls of her sanctuary closing in. Even here, 2,000 miles from the scene of the crime, she couldn't escape the consequences of falling in love with the wrong person at the wrong time. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Wheeler, this is Jessica from Channel 12 News. We'd love to get your side of the story about the Lockwood wedding. Exclusive interview, very tasteful, please call me." Then another. "Juliet Wheeler, this is TMZ. We're willing to pay for details about your relationship with Adrian Lockwood." And another. "Hi, I'm a blogger who writes about wedding drama. Can we chat?" She turned off her phone and buried her face in her hands. This was what she'd feared most. Becoming a story instead of a person. Having her private heartbreak turned into entertainment for strangers. A knock at her door made her freeze. Soft, tentative, not like the aggressive reporter she'd been imagining. "Juliet? It's Mrs. Chen from upstairs. I brought tea." Grateful for normal human contact, Juliet opened the door to find her elderly neighbor holding a thermos and wearing a concerned expression. "You look terrible, dear." "Thanks, Mrs. Chen. That's exactly what I needed to hear. I mean, you look sad. Come sit. Tell me what's wrong." Mrs. Chen had moved from Taiwan 40 years ago and had the supernatural ability to appear whenever Juliet was having a crisis. She'd shown up with soup when Juliet had the flu, with wine when she'd broken up with her last boyfriend, and with practical advice when Juliet had been considering whether to take the teaching job in Portland. Now she poured tea from her thermos and waited with the patience of someone who understood that some stories took time to tell. "I fell in love with someone I couldn't have," Juliet said finally. "Married, engaged, to my sister." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose, but she didn't look shocked. "Ah, that is complicated. That's one word for it. What happened?" "He called off the wedding, in front of 500 people, said he was in love with someone else." "And that someone was you?" "He didn't say my name, but—" Juliet gestured at the flowers. "Yeah." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Do you love him?" "Yes, which makes me a terrible person." "Why terrible? Love is not a choice. Love is what happens to us while we're making other plans. But he was my sister's. He was your sister's mistake. A man who doesn't love the woman he's about to marry is making a mistake. You're Adrian. He fixed the mistake before it became permanent. He's not my Adrian." "No? Then why are you so sad he's not here?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Juliet stared at the flowers, thinking about midnight conversations and dancing in someone's arms and feeling seen for the first time in her adult life. "Because I've never felt like I mattered to anyone before," she whispered. "And for one weekend, I mattered to him. And now? Now I'm hiding in Portland while he's probably dealing with lawyers and angry mothers and the mess he made of his life." Mrs. Chen stood, leaving the thermos on the table. "You know what I think? I think you're both hiding, and hiding is not living." After she left, Juliet sat alone with her tea and her flowers and the growing realization that she couldn't hide forever. Somewhere in New Jersey or Manhattan or wherever he was, Adrian was probably asking himself the same questions she was. What now? What next? How do you rebuild a life after you've blown it up for love? The answers felt impossible, but for the first time in 3 weeks she wanted to find them. Juliet was reading Jane Eyre to her AP English class when she saw him through the classroom window. Adrian stood across the street from Roosevelt High School, leaning against a black sedan, wearing jeans and a gray sweater that made him look younger, less like the corporate magnate, and more like the man who'd talked about literature in a hallway 3 weeks ago. Her voice faltered mid-sentence. "I am no bird and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. Ms. Wheeler?" Jessica Martinez, one of her brightest students, looked concerned. "Are you okay?" Juliet forced herself to look away from the window, back to the 25 faces watching her with varying degrees of attention and worry. "Sorry. Where were we?" "Right, Jane's Declaration of Independence." But her hands shook as she held the book, and her voice caught on the words about freedom and choice. Because outside, the man she'd been trying to forget was waiting for her, and she had no idea what that meant. The class period felt like it lasted 17 hours instead of 50 minutes. When the bell finally rang, Juliet's students filed out with their usual mix of enthusiasm and reluctance, but Jessica lingered behind. "Ms. Wheeler? There's a guy outside who's been there since lunch. Mrs. Patterson in the office said some reporters have been hanging around lately. Should we call security?" Reporters. Of course, that's what he looked like to anyone who didn't know better. A stranger watching the school waiting for someone. "No, it's okay, I know him." "You sure?" "Because Marcus said he looks like he could afford a really good lawyer," which is apparently what stalkers have now. Despite everything, Juliet almost smiled. Her students were protective of her in the way teenagers could be, fiercely loyal and completely dramatic. "I'm sure, but thank you for looking out for me." After Jessica left, Juliet sat alone in her classroom, surrounded by the familiar comfort of books and bulletin boards and the faint smell of dry erase markers. This was her sanctuary, her chosen life, her safe space, and Adrian was standing outside it, having somehow tracked her down across the entire country. She gathered her things with deliberate slowness, buying time to think. What did she say to the man who'd blown up his life in front of 500 people? How did she explain 3 weeks of silence? How did she tell him that she'd thought about him every day but convinced herself it was better this way? The hallways were mostly empty as she made her way to the main entrance. A few students called out goodbyes. A couple of teachers waved from their classrooms, and Principal Rodriguez nodded approvingly as she passed his office. Normal. Everything was determinedly normal, except for the man waiting outside who represented everything her quiet life wasn't. She pushed through the front doors, and there he was. Closer now, she could see the exhaustion in his face. The way his usually perfect hair was slightly messed up, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked like someone who'd been living on coffee and regret for 3 weeks. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." She stopped about 10 feet away, her teacher bag clutched like a shield. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you. To talk to you. He ran a hand through his hair, confirming her theory. "To apologize for destroying your life along with mine." "You didn't destroy my life, didn't I? You're 2,000 miles from home, hiding from reporters, probably getting asked uncomfortable questions by everyone you know." He gestured toward the school. "I brought a circus to your workplace, Juliet. That's not what I wanted." "What did you want?" The question hung between them in the crisp October air. Students were starting to emerge from the building, and a few curious glances were being thrown their way. "Can we go somewhere private, please?" Juliet looked around at the familiar street, the coffee shop where she graded papers on weekends, the bus stop where she waited every morning. Her real life, her chosen life, her safe life. "There's a park about 2 blocks away, we can walk." They fell into step beside each other, not quite touching but close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something expensive but subtle that reminded her of that midnight conversation in her mother's garden. "How did you find me?" she asked as they crossed the street. "It wasn't hard. You're not exactly hiding, you're just living quietly." He glanced at her. "Though I did have to convince 3 different school administrators that I wasn't a threat before they'd confirm you worked there." "Are you? A threat? To your peace of mind?" "Probably." They reached Laurelhurst Park, where families were pushing strollers and joggers were taking advantage of the late afternoon sunshine. Adrian led her to a bench overlooking the pond, where ducks were swimming in lazy circles. "I left her," he said without preamble. "I know. I was there." "No, I mean I left everything. The company, the board position, the penthouse. I resigned from everything that tied me to that life." Juliet stared at him. "Adrian, that's your entire life. Your family's legacy. My father's legacy was building something meaningful, not maintaining something hollow." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I spent 3 weeks with lawyers and accountants, untangling myself from commitments and contracts. My mother isn't speaking to me. Half of New York thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? Maybe, but I've never felt more sane. He turned to look at her. Do you know what I realized? Sitting in boardroom after boardroom, listening to people tell me how much my emotional breakdown was going to cost? What? That I'd rather be broke and honest than rich and empty. That my father didn't build a company so I could be miserable in an expensive suit. That love isn't a luxury. It's the only thing that matters. Adrian, I'm not asking you to fix my life, Juliet. I'm not asking you to feel guilty about choices I made. I'm asking you to tell me if there's any part of you that thinks we could build something real together. A duck splashed in the pond, sending ripples across the water. Children laughed somewhere behind them. Normal sounds of normal life. The kind of life she'd built for herself here in Portland. I can't go back to that world, she said quietly. The galas and the photographers and the perfect appearances, I'm not built for that. I know, that's why I left it. But your family will adjust or they won't. I can't live my life for their approval anymore. Your career. I'm starting over. I have some ideas about sustainable energy consulting, working with smaller companies instead of massive corporations. Nothing glamorous, but something meaningful. Starting over where? Wherever you are. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the pond. You can't uproot your entire life for someone you barely know. We had 3 conversations, Adrian. 3 conversations and 1 dance. 3 conversations where I felt more like myself than I had in 10 years. 1 dance where I forgot that love was supposed to be a business transaction. He stood too, moving closer but not crowding her. You're right. We barely know each other. But I'd like to change that, if you'll let me. What if it doesn't work? What if we're terrible together? What if this is just, I don't know, rebellion against your old life? Then we'll figure it out. Together. He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since that hallway conversation. Or we'll fail spectacularly and at least know we tried something real. Juliet stared at the water, watching the ducks paddle in their endless circles. Safe, predictable, content with their small pond and their simple needs. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what? Of wanting this too much. Of hoping for something I can't have. Of being hurt when you realize I'm not worth rebuilding your life for. Juliet. His voice was soft, certain. Look at me. She turned reluctantly and found him watching her with those gray eyes that had seen her from the very beginning. You are the bravest person I've ever met. You chose authenticity over approval, solitude over settling, teaching over fame. You saved me from marrying someone I didn't love, from living a lie, from becoming my mother. He stepped closer. You're worth rebuilding a dozen lives for. Your sister will never forgive me. My sister will move on. She'll find someone who actually sees her, who loves her for more than her Instagram presence. And someday maybe she'll thank us for saving her from a marriage that would have made us both miserable. Your mother will learn to live with disappointment. I'm 36 years old, Juliet. I can't spend the rest of my life making decisions based on other people's expectations. A family walked past with a toddler who was chasing the ducks, squealing with delight every time they flapped away from him. Pure joy, unself-conscious and real. I don't know how to do this, Juliet said. How to be with someone, how to trust that it's real. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together. Adrian reached for her hand, slowly, giving her time to pull away. What do you say? Want to try something terrifying and wonderful and completely uncertain? She looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on his fingers that suggested he'd been doing more manual work than boardroom presentations lately. Real hands. Honest hands. I have a lease until June, she said finally. I can wait until June. I can get an apartment nearby, start my consulting business, learn to like rain. I hate fancy restaurants. I like diners better anyway. I read obsessively and grade papers on Friday nights. I'll bring you coffee and try not to interrupt the good parts. I have anxiety attacks in crowds. We'll stay home, or find small crowds, or leave whenever you need to. I'm not glamorous or sophisticated or Instagram-worthy. You're real, and you're here, and you make me want to be the man my father raised instead of the man my mother expected. He squeezed her hand gently. That's worth more than all the sophistication in the world. Juliet felt tears start, but for the first time in weeks they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of possibility, of hope, of the terrifying realization that sometimes the best things in life required the biggest leaps of faith. Okay, she whispered. Okay, okay. Let's try something terrifying and wonderful and completely uncertain. Adrian's smile was brilliant, transformative. The kind of smile that made her understand why people wrote sonnets and started wars and blew up their perfectly planned lives. Thank you, he said, and kissed her forehead with the reverence of someone who'd been given an unexpected gift. As they walked back toward her school, hands linked and hearts hopeful, Juliet realized that Mrs. Chen had been right. Hiding wasn't living. But this terrifying leap into the unknown with someone who saw her, really saw her, this felt like the first real living she'd ever done. 2 years later, the small farmhouse outside of Bend, Oregon, looked nothing like the Wheeler estate in Princeton, and that was exactly why Juliet loved it. She stood in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron and sunlight streaming through windows that desperately needed washing, listening to Adrian's voice drift in from the backyard where he was on a conference call with a wind energy cooperative in Montana. His consulting business had grown slowly but steadily, built on relationships rather than corporate connections, and he seemed to love every challenging, unpredictable day of it. No, I understand the soil concerns, he was saying, his voice carrying the patient authority of someone who'd learned to listen before he spoke. Let me send you some data from a similar project in Colorado. 2 years. It had been 2 years since that afternoon in Laurelhurst Park, and somehow they'd built something real out of all that impossible timing and complicated family drama. Not perfect. Nothing about their life was perfect, but honest in a way that felt revolutionary after growing up in families where image mattered more than truth. The oven timer chimed, and Juliet pulled out a batch of chocolate chip cookies that would have made her domestic goddess sister laugh. They were slightly lopsided, a little too brown around the edges, and absolutely nothing like the pristine desserts that had graced Wheeler family dinners. But they smelled like home, and that was what mattered. Something smells incredible in here. She turned to find Adrian leaning against the doorframe, having finished his call, his hair slightly messed from running his hands through it while he worked. He wore jeans with actual dirt on them from the garden they'd planted last spring, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. He looked nothing like the perfectly groomed businessman she'd met in that hallway, and everything like the man she'd fallen in love with. Mrs. Chen's recipe, Juliet said, transferring cookies to a cooling rack. She sent it in her last letter along with photos of her new garden. Mrs. Chen had become an unexpected pen pal after they'd moved to Oregon, sending recipes and wisdom in equal measure. Her latest letter had included a photo of herself with a new boyfriend, a widower from her senior center, who apparently made excellent dumplings, and didn't mind that she gave unsolicited advice to everyone she met. Adrian wrapped his arms around Juliet from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. How was school today? Good. Complicated. Maggie Peterson is writing her college essay about her parents' divorce, and I think it might be the most honest thing any teenager has ever written. She leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She's applying to Portland State, wants to study social work, following in her teacher's footsteps? Not exactly, but choosing something real over something safe. She turned in his arms. Sound familiar? He smiled, the kind of smile that still made her forget they'd ever been apart. Vaguely. They'd moved to Bend 18 months ago, after Adrian's business had grown enough to support them and Juliet had found a position at the local high school that felt like coming home. The small town suited them both, big enough to have a decent coffee shop and a used bookstore, small enough that their neighbors knew their names and nobody cared about their past scandals. Any word from your father? Adrian asked, as he did every few weeks. A postcard from his European trip with Linda. They're in Tuscany now, apparently falling in love with small village life. She pulled the postcard from the refrigerator door, where it lived among grocery lists and appointment reminders. He says hi, and that he's proud of us for building something beautiful out of all the chaos. Robert Wheeler had been the one family member to stay in touch consistently. He'd remarried a year ago, a kind woman named Linda who taught pottery and didn't care about social status, and seemed happier than Juliet had ever seen him. He visited twice a year, always alone, always careful not to bring up the subjects that were still too raw to discuss. And your mother? Radio silence as usual. Juliet had stopped being hurt by Diane Wheeler's continued disapproval. Some people couldn't forgive disruptions to their carefully constructed worlds, and that was their choice to make. Though Savannah did post something interesting yesterday. She pulled out her phone, one of the few times she checked social media these days. Savannah's Instagram account had evolved over the past 2 years, shifting from influencer perfection to something more authentic. Her latest post was a photo of herself at a cooking class, flour in her hair and laughter in her eyes, with a caption that read, "Learning that imperfect can be beautiful. Thanks to everyone who's been patient with me while I figure out who I am when I'm not performing." "She looks happy," Adrian said, studying the photo. "She does. Really happy for the first time I can remember." Juliet scrolled to another post from a few weeks earlier. Savannah with a man who wasn't trying to look like a model, just looking at her like she was the most interesting person in the room. His name is David. He's a chef, completely uninterested in social media and apparently thinks she's funnier than she is beautiful. Good for her. Good for both of them. Juliet put the phone away. "I think maybe we all needed to blow up our lives a little to figure out what we actually wanted." "Any regrets?" Adrian asked, as he did sometimes when they were being particularly honest with each other. "About us? Never." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. "About the way it happened? Sometimes. I wish we could have found each other without hurting so many people." "Me too. But I can't regret the path that led us here." Through the window they could see the mountains in the distance, snow-capped and eternal, and the garden they'd planted together. Vegetables and herbs and flowers chosen more for joy than for appearance. It was a small life compared to what either of them could have had, but it was theirs. "The Millers are coming for dinner tomorrow," Juliet said, returning to the comfortable routine of their shared life. "And I promised to bring cookies to the school fundraiser on Friday. I'll help with both. The Montana project wraps up this week, so I'll have more time." "More time for what?" Adrian grinned, reaching into his pocket. "For this." The ring was simple, a vintage piece he'd found at an antique shop in town, with a small diamond that caught the light like a promise. Nothing like the massive engagement ring he'd given Savannah. Nothing designed to impress anyone other than the woman he was offering it to. "Adrian, I know we said we didn't need the piece of paper. I know we're happy as we are. But I want to stand up in front of our friends and neighbors and promise to love you for the rest of my life." He took her hand, the one with flour still dusting the knuckles. "I want to marry you, Juliet Wheeler. Not because it makes sense, not because anyone expects us to, but because I can't imagine loving anyone else the way I love you." She looked at the ring, at his hopeful face, at the life they'd built in this imperfect kitchen with its mismatched dishes and crooked shelves. Nothing about it was polished or Instagram-worthy, but everything about it was real. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit like it had been waiting for her all along. Like everything else in their unexpected love story, it was perfectly imperfect, exactly right. Later they sat on their front porch with mugs of coffee and a plate of slightly lopsided cookies, watching the sun set behind the mountains and planning a wedding that would be small and simple and completely their own. No photographers, no social media coverage, no 500-person guest list, just family who truly loved them, friends who'd become chosen family, and vows spoken from the heart instead of written for show. "Do you think your father will walk you down the aisle?" Adrian asked. "I think he will. And I think he'll cry, which will make me cry, which will make you cry. I'm okay with that." "Good, because I have a feeling this is going to be the kind of wedding where everyone cries happy tears." As the stars began to appear in the clear Oregon sky, Juliet thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, hiding in hallways, afraid of her own feelings, convinced she was destined to live life from the sidelines. That girl could never have imagined this, a love that had been worth every difficult conversation, every family rift, every moment of uncertainty. Sometimes the best things in life required the biggest leaps of faith, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, someone caught you when you jumped. What would you have done in Juliet's position? Would you have had the courage to love someone who changed everything for you? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.